Between now and May 26th, when the legislative session ends, is expected to end anyway, there are a handful of journalists who'll be very busy keeping you informed about what's happening at the Capitol and why it's happening. And that includes the moderator for our in-depth segment this week, our own Jason Doyle, who sat down with some of his colleagues to discuss what's ahead for the next 3.5 months.
Thank you, Rich. For this edition of In-Depth, we have three distinguished guests for us. First of all, Sean Ashley, the publisher of Quorum Call. Beth Wallace also joins us. She's the education reporter for State Impact OK. And Reese Gorman, a political reporter for The Frontier. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, let's start with reflections of the State of the State address this year by Governor Stitt. And Sean, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's important to remember that not only was this the governor's fifth State of the State address, it was also the first of his second term. So I think a lot of what he had to say reflected on what he accomplished in that first term and then where he looks to go in the second term. And he laid out some pretty big goals in that, I believe.
All right, Beth. What are your reflections for the State of the State address?
Sure. I think from an educational standpoint, you're seeing kind of a divide between maybe some legislative Republicans as well as the executive office. And so what he was talking about was we're seeing vouchers, we're seeing incentive pay for teachers, but on the other side, we're seeing more making teaching a better job, making teaching more tenable for teachers. So it's interesting. We're seeing two different sort of interpretations of how to fix this massive teacher shortage that we have.
All right, Reese, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is, like Sean was saying, this is going to be his fifth State of the State, or was his fifth State of the State. And I think you could really tell that the experience that he's had from giving the last State of the States. The past, I know last year's, there was, I wouldn't say controversial, but there were things that were said that some legislative leaders didn't agree with, and he pushed priorities that didn't get passed. And you can tell that he really honed in and really focused on accomplishments. He did lay out priorities. But a lot of those priorities were things that had broad support, minus some tax cuts and some then the education savings accounts. But you could tell that it was probably, from a political standpoint, his best State of the State yet. And you could tell that he's had those practices over the past four, and now going into the fifth one.
All right, very good. Well, let's dive in a little bit. And Sean, let's start with you. We've heard a lot about the grocery store tax elimination over the last year. What do you think it's going to take to get it across the legislative finish line this year?
Well, that's really an interesting question, because if you'll remember, a year ago, the governor proposed this and it didn't get traction in the Senate. It passed the House. Then he tried to get them to do it in special session, and once again, it passed the House, but it didn't pass the Senate. And the Senate was looking at a broad-based approach to tax relief. And back in October, Senate President Pro Tem Greg Treat said he did not believe a grocery sales tax cut would be part of their package when they put it forward. They've yet to do that. So ultimately, whether or not that particular issue passes may depend entirely on the Senate once again.
Interesting stuff. Go ahead,
On
Reese.
on that too, I mean, if you just were watching the State of the State from the press box, where you can look out and see the legislators, you notice that Senator Roger Thompson, chairman of Appropriations, the Senate, wasn't standing or clapping next to, and he's a big part. If you're going to do tax cuts, it's going to have to go through Roger Thompson. And he wasn't standing or clapping. There's some senators as well that weren't standing. And another thing of note too is that whenever they were in special session, when they say, well, we're not going to do grocery sales tax cut, we're going to put together this task force to look at it. I don't know exactly what they called it. They still have not released that tax plan. I had an interview with Greg Tree, and I asked him, I said, hey, when are we? And they said it's completed, but we're not ready to release it yet. So they have not yet released the tax plan that they do have. And although they said that it is done, so we really don't know where the Senate stands. We do know that they probably don't want to cut the grocery sales tax. Stitt also introduced a personal income tax cut as well in the State of the State. I think it's around a 0.7% deduction. If I was that accurate?
0.76%, which would take it down to 3.99%, under 4%, which I think is their target for both the individual income tax and the corporate income tax, which would be reduced down to 3.25%.
Interesting. Tax debate is always interesting, but of course, the hallmark right now is education. So Beth, We've heard about these education vouchers. So what do you think is going to happen during the session as that debate unfolds?
Sure. So the governor would like $130 million to put toward this plan that he calls an educational savings account, which we also call vouchers too. And the idea would be taking taxpayer dollars and giving it to families to put toward educational expenses, usually something like private school tuition. And so that's kind of the idea of educational savings accounts. And there are two bills right now, one from Senator Daniels, one from Senator Jett, that would achieve these in kind of different ways and also has different dollar amounts attached to it. But we're not really seeing a huge push for it out of the governor's office. Of course, we are with Secretary and Superintendent Walters and Governor Stitt, but at the legislative preview, where the Senate Education Committee Chair Adam Pugh, he was asked point blank, why aren't vouchers on your list of priorities? And he said, vouchers will not be a priority for me this session. And considering he's the one who allows bills to go and be heard in committee, it's a pretty big statement for him to make.
I think also, I think as confused as viewers back home might be, I think the legislative litter is equally as confused as where vouchers are going to come from. There's talks all the time about where vouchers can come from, but I don't think anyone really knows. Treat did not file a voucher bill this session when it was his big push and last session. And personally, and I don't see him wanting to stick out his neck again when he got burned last time with his, he had title stricken, which is in the weeds, but and it still didn't pass. It was a pro tem bill. So I don't see him wanting to stick his neck out on that again without guarantee that would pass.
Well, we can do title stricken, a little inside baseball for our viewers. Title stricken basically makes the bill ineffective and it can't pass all the way through. It's a security measure to make sure it continues to get the work it needs. All right, well, Reese, let's return it back to you and talk a little bit about workforce development. It seems like Governor Stitt is looking to tie all levels of education to businesses and trying to develop that. Do you see that vision starting to take place?
Definitely, I do. He's always, since he first got in office, that's been his thing. He's a business owner by trade. And he's really wanted to develop the workforce, whether it be bringing in Canoe, bringing in all these other companies. And the thing is, some of them have been unsuccessful, some of them have been successful, like with Project Ocean, which is Panasonic. And it's really just, we really don't know how that's going to play out. He obviously is pushing for it, but it's ultimately up to the businesses if they want to come to Oklahoma or not. And right now, it's really just a coin toss.
All right, let's stick a pin in on the incentive packages. I'll get to that a little bit later, but I want to go to Sean. And Sean, the foster care system was mentioned. It's kind of the first time we've heard it from Stitt in the State of the State address. So there's been an effort over the years to help kids in state custody. So what is the governor planning to make things even better?
Well, the governor was not specific in what his proposal would be, and this was sort of one of those longer-term goals he seemed to be referring to in his State of the State address. But throughout the legislative interim, we saw a number of studies related to the foster care system. Viewers may recall several years ago that Oklahoma was part of a class action lawsuit over the poor conditions of its foster care system. And a settlement has improved the way that system operates. But now lawmakers are wanting to take that a step further, it seems, and sort of expedite that process. Because even today, children seem to be spending too much time in foster care when they could either be returned to their families, if that's appropriate, or moved on to adoptive families. And I think this legislative session, you'll sort of see the first step of that with bills being considered, and then that will increase over time.
It also appeared that Governor Stitt, following up on that, was trying to bring the man back into the family and actually had a guest there in the gallery to talk a little bit about that. Are those two things really related?
I think they may be, particularly for the governor, who stressed the importance of his own father in his life. Oftentimes, as he pointed out in his speech, we see that families lack one parent or the other, and particularly the father is often the missing parent. He stressed the importance of perhaps building on programs like the one he referenced in his speech that would help fathers stay in their families. And I think, again, that is part of his long-term vision he sees as he begins his second term, and sort of a mark he could potentially leave on the state if he could begin to reverse those numbers for the state of Oklahoma. It's probably going to be a heavy lift. It's probably going to involve a number of state agencies and religious groups and charitable organizations. And I'm not sure there's a specific plan in mind, But he has espoused the goal. Now he has to figure out how to get there.
All right, let's turn back to education issues, Beth. And one thing that caught my eye was that he wants to build more schools and not fewer schools. And he wants to create what's called the Innovation School Fund to help with specialized academies. So how would that work if the legislature decides to back that?
It's a good question because we don't really know. There haven't been a whole lot of details about this yet. We're not really sure if this would be something that would be more of a public school, a charter school, a private school, maybe a career tech kind of thing. But he does mention Norman Aviation Academy quite a bit as sort of an example of what this might be. And that is from Norman Public Schools. It's just an academy off of Norman Public Schools. And they take kids and they do a STEAM program. And it's really geared toward aviation and aerospace engineering, kind of this pipeline toward that industry. And so I would imagine that's what the kind of schools he's thinking about would look like. But as of this point, we know about how much money he wants for it. He wants $100 million, and that's about it. We don't know a whole lot else.
It almost sounds like he's trying to develop magnet schools somewhat.
Possibly.
You know, something like that. Well, Reese, let's turn back to you and talk a little bit about those incentive packages. We know all about Project Ocean, which was supposed to be bringing in an unnamed battery company to come in and build a mega factory in northeast Oklahoma. But do you see that the legislature will continue to go for these big lands here, these big corporations, or are they going to go with something that's going to attract more of the medium and smaller businesses as we go forward?
I think if you just look at our success with the big companies, we haven't had much. Tesla didn't come, Panasonic didn't come. So I think you will see the legislator be more willing to kind of appropriate the funds to more of the medium, smaller things, that we will have a higher likelihood of attracting those business to Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma, I mean, you got to dream big, and obviously we want the big companies, but it just doesn't seem like they're willing to come right now. And something else is like making sure, he mentioned in the State of the State, that ensuring that these places that we're building, whether it be Mid-American or wherever it may be, has the infrastructure ready so that whenever we do land, then we don't, we land you, but it's going to be a couple years before you come in. Have that infrastructure already in place so that you can just come right in rather than it being a longer process. I think that's something that will help in the long run.
I know, kind of an offshoot of that, just kind of pushing back on the Project Ocean incentive package is Representative Tom Gann, who's introduced legislation to eliminate that because he doesn't want it accidentally triggered. Can I get your thoughts on that?
Well, after Panasonic indicated that it was going to locate its facility in Kansas, I was speaking to the governor's office, and they remain hopeful that they can land another project that could possibly qualify for that program. Keep in mind that we have better than $690 million sitting in the bank, designed essentially to incent a large company that meets very high requirements, very significant requirements, to come to Oklahoma. But until they do that, that money just sits there. And I think that's one of the concerns about from Representative Gann, and it's certainly a concern from a number of Democrats who have also suggested that maybe that legislation needs to be undone, that money pulled back and used for something else in the state budget.
All right, and just one more follow-up with you, Beth, as we kind of wind things down. What do you think the priorities are going to be now as far as a push toward education? What do you think out of the slate that the governor has proposed he would like to most see done?
Sure. I think getting teachers in classrooms is going to be the headline for this legislative session. It's just going to be, how do you do that? So I think the incentive pay is probably going to be part of that. His package is a lot smaller than the one that even Secretary Walters had proposed as well. And I think too, there's obviously a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of campaign rhetoric. I think we're going to hear more of that. I don't think we'll hear less of it. So I think, overall this legislative session, it's going to be a back and forth. It's going to be probably the legislature versus the executive office when it comes to policy for education this year. And we're in a record teacher shortage, so we have to figure it out. All
right. Well, folks, thank you so much. I can't wait to work with you during this session as we cover the the 59th legislature's first official session, regular session of 2023. So I really appreciate you guys going. We've got Reese Gorman from the Frontier, Beth Wallace from State Impact, and our friend Sean Ashley from Quorum Call. And we'll have the panel back at the end of May to discuss what we predicted and if it actually happened. And we'll see what kind of surprises we have during this session. Rich, back to you.